Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. Now, today we are going to continue on with our basic tutorial for Gary Grigsby's War in the East. And this is episode number 9. And in this episode, we're going to talk about production, supply, and logistics. And as many of you probably know, there are a million quotes out there, a million different generals' autobiographies that say, the troops don't win the war, logistics wins wars. And in a lot of respects, that can be true. It doesn't matter how good your troops are if you can't get them the bullets, the food, the uniforms, in the Germans' case in World War II in the Eastern Front, the winter coats, the fuel for the panzers that they need. A lot of people could make the argument that the Germans ultimately lost the war in the East because of their poor logistics in 1941 and the fact that they did not have enough trucks to get supply, fuel, uh, ammunition out to where it needed to go. That may be a little harsh because the Soviet Union is a massive country and the logistics needed to pull off what they were trying to pull off maybe could never be done. But we're going to try to do it because we've got to try to win this war. And I think that the logistics and supply in this game is done very well. It is a challenge. It is something that you really, really need to focus on. You can't just look at the counters and the hexes on the map and say, well, I'm just going to play this as a traditional war game and, blast away the Soviets. And you will get stopped short of Moscow because you will run out of fuel if you're not paying a lot of attention to your logistical system, your logistical grid. That being said, it is not that complicated. I know a lot of people walking into this game think, oh, the supply system is very complicated, or I've heard that it's very complicated. I think at the end of this episode, you will have a really firm grasp on it and will understand how it works and what you need to pay attention to make sure that you're getting the stuff you need to get out to as far east as you can, that you can get it out there. Now, at the end, we're also going to talk about what happens during the winter, during blizzard turns. The first winter of 1941, the Germans, or the Axis in general, but specifically the Germans in front of Moscow, suffer tremendous penalties in the first winter, as always seems to happen when someone invades the Soviet Union, what used to be Russia, whether it be Napoleon or later the Germans. There is a terrible winter when they decide to invade, and it seems to always strike right before they get to Moscow. So we are going to dive right in here and we're going to start with production. And the reason I'm going to start with production is it's the easiest concept to understand because you really don't have a whole lot of say over production. It's not something that you can micromanage really. Now that is different for the Russians or the Soviets. If you play as the Soviets, you actually have quite a bit more control over your production. And I would say that in general, as you become more of an advanced player, you should look to maybe play the Soviets at some point because it has more complications. For instance, you can build units. Certain units, we can't really do that as the Axis. You can move factories around and put them in different places. You can evacuate them out. You can, kind of change what those factories do a little bit. You just have a lot more options as the Soviets. So I know that we're playing as the quote unquote playing, or we're doing this tutorial as if we're the Axis, the Germans in the Axis. But really, the Soviets are more challenging early on. Now, if you can hold on, then all of a sudden the advantage really swings in your favor. Um, but just something to think about that when it comes to production, as the Soviet player, you have a lot more control. So let's go up to well, first of all, while we're on this map, let's go look at what's called the permanent supply and production places on the map. Okay, and how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to look here to toggle rail damage info on and off. And when you do that and you see these red hexes back here, these are your permanent supply locations. Okay, this is where most of your supply will be coming from, and these areas need to be linked up by rail to your front. Okay? Let's turn that off for a second and let's look at factories. So what I just showed you was supply. Now these are factories, and what do these factories do? Well, you can see here, this is resource production. It can be manpower, heavy industry. There's rail yard points here. These are all things you don't really need to worry about. It's interesting to see on the map. You can flip around here and see what each one of these factories does, or the permanent supply points on this side of the map. I just want to show you this is where all of your production comes from, whether that be, you know, we can look down here if we look at this tooltip. Here on the north side of Berlin, they are making Panzer 2Js, Stug 3Bs. They are making Panzer joggers here. They're also producing rail yard points and manpower points and resource production points, heavy industry. You can go around and look at all of these, but ultimately for you playing the game, it really doesn't matter. You're going to want them to produce as much as possible, and that's all great, but the game really handles that except for one thing or in one location. And if this is the production screen, this production screen is going to show you everything you're producing. Okay, and you can see it all here. It's Italians are producing things, the Finns are producing things, the Romanians and the Hungarians, and of course the Germans here. Now, on this screen, you're going to see exactly the different kinds of things it's producing. It starts with the air. So these are all going to be air-related airplanes in general. And then when we get down here just a little ways, I thought I just saw it. Where to go? Where to go? There we go. Ground. Then you're going to see so air and ground. Okay. And then it'll list all these things. You see all the panzers here that are being produced. And let's look at these columns. So what you have here is capacity, kind of self-explanatory. What kind of production capacity do you have? How many can you make every month? All right. And this can kind of guide you about what's going to be coming online. So, for instance, these dive bombers, and you can go look at what they are. It will tell you this. If you click on this, it will tell you where they're being produced, what the capacity is, and how much damage that factory has. Okay. Down here, it will also show you the upgrade paths. But again, the game really takes care of upgrade if you want it to. You can manually set your upgrade paths. I generally do not. It's just not a rabbit hole I go down. Um, but let's go back down here. Let's go look at the Panzers. Let's look at a Panzer 4G. Our capacity right now is 2. Those one is being made in Linz and one is being made in Plauen. Okay, great. We know that. We can see the upgrade path. This will tell you everything about the Panzer 4G. All right, so this is capacity. This is how much of that factory capacity has been damaged. All right, so you have capacity to make 45 BF-109Gs. Great. It's nice to crank out more of those every time. How many have been damaged? Or how much of that production has been damaged? 0. How many do you have in the pool? How many have been stockpiled up? That is this column, okay? This is how many have been built. Now this is turn 1, and so it's 0 for now, right? These already start in the pool. We've got this capacity, but nothing's been built yet. And then this is the number of units of this type that are on the board. So if you wanted to go see, let's see what our most plentiful tank is. It appears to be the Panzer II-C. Okay, let's go to the Panzer II-C. There are 19 of them currently out on the board, and you can go see where those are located. So you can see they're mainly in Panzer divisions. They're also in this Flammpanzer battalion, which is a support unit, and another one here, but mainly they're all in Panzer divisions, okay? And so this production screen is going to show you, what's currently in production. If it has an asterisk, it is not, you don't have any on the board. They have not currently been produced, okay? Um, the hash means that they are, all right? And then you can always see the upgrade path, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what is this over here? This just tells you, so Germany, you see 75%, air 57%. You're like, huh? What does that mean? Well, obviously, the Germans were also fighting on the Western Front and down in the Mediterranean. And so only 75% of German production is going to go to the Eastern Front, the actual front where we're fighting. So you're only getting 75% of German production and only 50% of their production of air units, okay? And so it's just showing you that. Finland, Italy, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, everybody except for Italy here is going 100% to the Eastern Front. They were really only fighting in the East. Italy, of course, is fighting mainly in the Mediterranean. They're only giving you 10% of their production. Down here, you'll see the Czechs, the Polish, the Bulgarians. This number is for production of assets. This is how much of their actual manpower they're giving you. Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, not giving you any. Um, you have captured areas, excuse me, that could be giving you supply and resources. That would be listed here. You see how many towns are giving you manpower, and that can increase as you go across the Ukraine, for instance. You see your fuel stores, your oil stores, your supply stores. This is, what have you got stocked up of these items and resources. Now, for this game, there are three types really of what we call the big general supply. All right. So the generalized word supply is broken out into three things, and that is supplies, ammo, and fuel. And if you go look at any unit, and we'll go do that, it will list how many supplies they have, how much ammo they have, and how much fuel they have. Okay. Then every headquarters unit has a supply dump or a or has multiples of supply dumps and fuel dumps. What is that? That is just their permanent stockpile. And I say permanent, it can be destroyed, it can be used, but it looks like an element. And I guess we can always come back to this screen. Let's just go look at one. So here is the 29th Corps headquarters. When we look here, you see it's got 225 support elements. It's got a supply dump, which is 260. This is in tons, okay? Supply dump and a fuel dump. So it can store this stuff up. Um, and build it, right? So that it can be used in future turns. And so that's what that number was. How many supply dumps do you have in headquarters? You can see here we have 44,000 tons worth and fuel dumps as well. Here, vehicles and units, vehicles become very, very important. We're going to get into that. And vehicles in the pool, we see 175,000. That is so important. They list it on the front screen up here because you've got to keep track of how much of your vehicle pool you're using. Now, I already mentioned that a big problem the Germans had is that they ran out of generic vehicles to transport around their supply, ammunition, and fuel. And because of that, they had to use horses, they had to use local population, they had to try to do whatever they could. If you've ever watched any World War II documentary, you're probably familiar with those pictures of the Germans pushing sleds through the mud, trying to get equipment and supplies to where they need to be, because they had a severe shortage of vehicles. But we'll get into that. Um, you can turn this production filter on and off so you can see actually what's being produced now that's relevant now. You can also see, of course, if it's off, you can see everything that you'll eventually get in the game. Um, Show types. So you can come here if you want to sort it. This makes more sense to you. You can see jet fighters, night fighters, fighters, fighter bomber. It's every different kind of unit, what they're classified as, light tanks, medium. This is also helpful if you don't know exactly what an element is or a unit is, um, or an element within that unit. So the heavy tanks, the tigers. Now the tigers are not being produced yet, of course. That's why they have asterisks. If we did the production filter on, now it will just show us what we are currently producing. Okay, well, we'll turn that off. It's kind of cool to see some of the stuff we'll be getting eventually. And you can go down here, and this, like I said, will help you figure out exactly what uh, various elements are. If you're just not familiar with them, you can sort them like this. Go and click on this heavy tank destroyer. Go look at a picture of it, where it's being produced, what it is. A lot of information on the screen. You can also see all pools, active pools, transit pools, which are things that have been damaged, but that are coming back for you. Okay, and so that's production. That's the production screen. Ultimately, though, you have almost no control over that. The Axis in general, whether it be the Germans or otherwise, will be producing stuff, but you can't go tell the game, I want you to produce this, except in a broad generalization that shows up down here all the way at the bottom, in the bottom left on the production screen. Okay, so right above here, before we get into that, let's talk about special here. This will show you how many port points you get. This has to do with that ports, how fast they can unload things. You can use ports as supply bases. Okay, rail yard, manpower, vehicle, all of these things. You can look at it. Again, you don't really have any control over this, so it's just interesting to look at. What you do have control over is this generic thing called production level, all the way down, bottom left, production screen. And you can set these percentages to what you want. Now, they can never go over 100%, and some of them cannot go below 25%. But let's say you get to a point where you're not worried about building forts at all. And this is all based on the amount of supply. Now, it takes supply, and in this case, I'm not talking the general supply, I'm talking specific supply, okay? Those supply units, it takes so much to build certain things. You can direct in a very general, broad way where you want that supply funneled to. So if you want to build more aircraft and you want less ground elements, seems like an odd choice, but if that's what you want, you can set ground elements to 50, okay? Oh, but it does cost admin points. So I probably should have told you that. It does cost admin points. So your admin points up here, if you want to mess around with this, let's just see 99. I just can't remember if, yeah, so it costs 1 AP. So for changing certain of these, it costs 2 AP. For this to go down one level costs 1 AP, right? Change construction level from 100 to 99 for forts and cities. Okay, whatever. That would change this. Well, let's just do it and see it actually click down. -1, yes. Now that's 99. Okay, and so everything else is going to get a little piece of that pie, that 1% that we took off here. Okay, and so that generally is what you can do when it comes to production. Now, as the Soviets, as I said, you can move different factories around. You can make a lot more decisions. So when we look at, hey, factories are on in Lublin, you can go and look and see what these factories are doing, but ultimately there's nothing you can really do about it. All right. And so the production screen, interesting to see what you have in your pools and whatnot. While we're here, I'll go out and mention that this goes to two different factors in your individual units, those pools and how much you're producing and why you might want to go look at that screen. One is if you go to an airbase, all right, and you see, the 21st LW, and you get down here, you can see, your different units, your different air units that you have here. Let's just click on one, and you'll see here replacements allowed. All right. You can go in and pick and choose which ones of these air units actually get replacements. And if you disallow it, not allowed, then other air units will get those planes. As it is, the AI is going to decide between all of the different air units that you have that are turned on to allowed, which ones get replacements. This gives you a little bit of control if there's, for some reason, air units you do not want to get replacements because you have a shortage of this type of plane, or let's just say you only want this kind of strategic recon plane to be, as part of Army Group Center, and this is down at Army Group South, and you just don't think you need them down here, you can turn all of these strategic recons down here to not allowed, right? The other thing is this aircraft change. This is upgrades, and you can decide whether the game auto picks your upgrades. You could click on this and say only upgrade, and we talked about this before. We talked about this when it came to the air units, which is, what does this mean? Well, when you have it on auto, if the game thinks it's a good idea, it can actually make you go backwards on the upgrade scale. Why would it do that? Well, it could be because you have a shortage of the current plane and it wants a full unit of just of the newest type of plane, so it puts them all in one unit, and another unit may have to go backwards for a little bit until you build more. Okay, this allows you to say, hey, we're only going forward, guys. So when the AI changes things and what goes into your air units, it will only do upgrades. It will never go backwards. Or you can manually pick your upgrades. All right. So that's really production. You may say, well, wow, that's really it. Well, it also is very important. Oh, I should say, while I did the air units, let's do the ground units. Same idea with ground units, but they are controlled here. If you want them to get priority on replacements, go to refit. Turn them to refit. Now, if you're on a rail line, if you're back far from the front, they have much more of a chance of actually getting quote unquote refitted. All right. But refit, you're really telling this that replacements should get priority here. Now, every unit has a chance to get replacements. So this is not like if you don't have a unit on refit, that does not mean it's not going to get reinforcements or replacements, whatever you want to call them. It just means these are given priority. And usually, if you're doing a good job of cycling your units to cut down on fatigue, you will wait until a unit gets back here. You'll set it on a rail line and you'll have it on refit and it'll get priority and it will build up very quickly because it will be getting priority on its replacements. You can also put it on reserve at the start. We're always on ready. Okay. So that is really production, but it does come up in one other key area, and that is as the Axis player, you are also very curious about Soviet production. Why is that? Well, now the Soviets can move their factories around, but sometimes you're coming way too fast as the Axis player and they can't get them out in time, or they don't do a good job planning, or they can, depending on when you get there, they can only get a certain portion of the factories out. Two things. One is you have got to try to capture as many Soviet factory locations as you can so that eventually, when that Soviet production ramps up, they've got a lot less factories to do it with. And so let's scoot out a little bit and you'll see, kind of where the Soviet factories are really congregated. So Stalino, Rostov. So this should kind of give you a good idea. What are we gunning for? okay, as fast as we can get there. Stellino is a very obvious example with all of these factories all around it, okay? And now just because they're red doesn't mean they're all the same. You can look and see what each one produces. Now, because of Fog of War, you might not always know exactly what it produces, but like look at this one. This production at Stellino produces vehicles, 29 points of armaments, 19 in manpower, which is a big manpower score. You want to go capture this hex because the Soviets may get some of that out. Uh, by getting it out, it gets damaged, okay? And so that's one thing that you're doing is just by forcing them to move it, it automatically gets damaged. But there's a real chance that you can get to these hexes, some of these hexes anyway, before they can move them out, and then they lose that production. All right. Now, they don't always lose it permanently. If they retake the hex, they can restart those. Now, another thing is if you capture oil or resources, then you can start to use those production points, right? And as the axis, the more oil you can get, the better. So oil and resources, you want to go after those. Of course, a uh, big X that Hitler had on the map was to try to come and get all of these oil and resources down this way. You see oil production. This is near Baku, but it's oil production, fuel production, those kind of things you can use yourself. Now that's a long ways down, but this one isn't so far. You can get to this one. I say not so far. What is that? Couple thousand miles. I mean, it is obviously a long ways away, but you're going to want to go through these and see like this one was 20 manpower. Now you may get to a point you say, this is good. I've got the Crimea. I'm fine. I've gone far enough. And then you look at this and say, well, 20 manpower that are cranking out for the Soviets are a lot of Soviet soldiers. Maybe I should go get this town and turn that spigot off, right? And so that's something else to think about when it comes to production. Now, let's get into supply and logistics. I think we've kind of covered really what's important in production. Let's get to supply and logistics because this is really where you do have a lot of control. This is, obviously the most important thing is that you encircle Soviet troops, capture them with as few losses as you can take, and that you move really fast to the east. Those are the most important things in this game. To do that, and maybe the second most important thing in this game, is to develop these rail lines, whichever ones you pick, to develop these rail lines with German gauge to get supply, fuel, and ammunition out to your troops. Okay? So this game has three specific supply types. Now, sometimes if have said supply, I mean it in the general sense. I mean everything. So everything under the umbrella of supply, which would be all three. But I'll try not to do that moving forward because they really are three specific types. And you can see that with any division you click on. And here you've got well, let's just click on the back of this. Um, you've got your supply, fuel, ammunition. Okay? Supply, fuel, ammunition. And it gives you a percentage on the front of the card of the percent of each one that you have compared to your need. All right. And so we'll go through all of this back of the card later. But if you just look at supply and need, 226 to 126, I'm not going to sit here and do the math, but I'm guessing that's 179%. Same with fuel, 3821, 180%. So you have that much in, shouldn't go that far down, you have that much in your unit, and this is how much that unit needs. Okay? Um, and so your big challenge is to get that out to your units once they start to move. And that really comes down to your supply grid. And so, what is your supply grid? Well, for this, I'm going to turn off factories. We don't really need that. I'm going to turn on rail damage. All right. Um, and it shows us nothing. Why is it showing us nothing? Hold on, hold on. There we go. So here is rail damage. All right. This, you will be clicking on this, or you should click on this every single turn because your supply grid begins and ends with your railways. And your railways start all the way. I showed you those permanent supply areas, and here they are red again. This is where all of your quote unquote general supply is coming from. This is where all of your supply, your fuel, your ammunition is coming from. Now, it may also be coming from, places on the map, but this is really uh, what are called your permanent supply locations. This is where they're coming from. Now, these at the start, of course, are going to be all green, and they should be all green really most of the game, unless either the Soviets start to push here into your territory, or you get some partisan activity that can also they can cut rail lines. So that's very historically modeled, right? The partisan activity really messed up the messed up the Germans once they got deep into the Soviet Union. You will get partisan activity back here, especially if you're not meeting the garrison requirements. And in an earlier episode, I talked about garrison requirements, but essentially a town, which is a dot, needs 4,000 garrison of men in a unit. A light urban needs 8,000 and a heavy urban needs like 12,000. So those are the garrison requirements. And if you don't put people in garrisons in uh, the town or light urban or heavy urban areas, you will start to get partisans popping up and they will cut your rail lines and nothing will stop you in your tracks faster than Soviet partisans cutting your rail line because if you can't get supply out here, your troops grind to a halt very quickly. But as you can see, as we are right now, we have a good green rail line all the way to where we are, although you will notice, especially if we scoot in here, this broken line. What that means is the rail line there is good, but you're right next to Soviet troops, okay? Now, railroad repair guys are not meant to be down into the thick of the action, and so these will show crosshatched, and they will, it doesn't break or well, that's not true. This will break your supply line going any further than that because you are next to Soviet troops. Always keep that in mind, especially later on when you're in front of Moscow. You will have, it'll show that it's green all the way to a certain point, but then you'll start to see these broken greens, and it means that somewhere along the line here, you have a Soviet unit that is right next to yours, and that is going to start to hurt your rail network. Okay? So it really doesn't cost. Now they have rewritten those supply rules in 112, but I can say I say in 112 like you know what that means. We're playing version 1.12.06, so this is the sixth patch of the 112 patch. In version 1.12.00, they rewrote some of the supply rules. I don't think it's as drastic of a change as some people do. I think in the big picture, it still all kind of works the same. Um, but as part of that, these permanent supply sources and how that all works, and also once you get out here, how it works did change a little bit. So we're going to talk about how it currently is. Okay. Now, the main um, oh, and the reason I brought that up is there used to be no rail limit to the amount of general, the big general supply that you could move down a rail network. All right. Think about what a tremendous advantage that is. That basically, if you can keep your rail network in good repair and keep it close to your front, there is no limit to the number of or the amount of supply, fuel, and ammunition that you can send out there. Okay. And so that's a huge advantage. They have changed that with 1.12 that now there is a limit to some degree. I don't think it really comes that much into play unless you are moving a lot of troops down the rail, and then all of a sudden your supply may get constricted a little bit because it is no longer unlimited. But for purposes of this basic tutorial, let's not, it just isn't that important, okay? So you may be saying, all right, great. We've got this green rail, so if we move here, all of this rail back here is going to turn green. No, unfortunately, that's not how it works. All right. What the problem is that once you get into the Soviet Union used different gauge rail. And what does that mean? That means the two railroad tracks were further apart or close. Well, I think they were further apart than the German rail. All right. And so they were not of the same gauge, meaning that all of the cargo uh, or the containers that the Germans had to send on rail would not fit on Soviet rail, right? So what had to happen? Well, the Germans, they call it railroad repair in this game, but essentially they had to rebuild the entire railroad. They had to go in and take those rails and move them to the German specifications, all right? And they had special units that did this. And for this portion, I'm going to X out of here. I'm going to exit out of this scenario. I already did this before. I called it railroad. I'm going to open up the scenario that is just the road to Leningrad to show you this. Okay. And I want to make this caveat before people start commenting. I did not do this the most efficient way. I didn't even do it in an efficient way at all. All I did is blow some Soviet units out of here so I could show you the railway. So before you tell me, oh my gosh, you did a terrible job for the first turn here, I understand that. All right. I was not trying to do this to make it most efficient. What I do want to show you is these special railroad units. This one is FBD4. It's got the little shovel on it here, three X's. It is attached to Army Group North. All right, let's go to our commander screen for a second and see that um, our units, let's do it this way. Um, well, I can show you here. You have FBD4. That's what we're looking at here. Okay. If we go down here further, oh, I see why it's not, shoot. I see why it's not showing me that. Sorry, my bad. Let's X out of this and actually go back to the main scenario. Luckily, you can get out of these scenarios very quickly. We'll come back to this in a moment. I was like, why is it not showing me everything I want? Let's go to bidder, and I guess it doesn't really matter. We just want to go to the grand scenario. Let's go to our commander's report up here. And now you'll see what we have up here at the top. We have got four FBD units. This is what I wanted to show you. You have FBD1, which is attached to Army Group South. You have FBD 3 and 2, so 2 and 3 are attached to Army Group Center, and FBD 4 is attached to Army Group North. So as you see, each Army Group has at least one, and Army Group Center has two. Although I'll tell you, quick tip, one of these Army Group Center ones, I always send to Army Group South so that I have two in the South because the rail lines down there, you need two. It's more spaced out, let's put it that way. But these are your four specialized railroad units, okay? So let's go back to our road to Leningrad scenario that I have set up. And there we go. Let's bring that back. Now, what do these things do? Well, I said they're specialized railroad units. What they do is rebuild the railroad to German standards. All right. Now, one thing that you need to know about that is you see this thing called the Baltic Rail Zone. You see these white or this white line that goes along here. In the Baltics, it was much easier to repair the gauge. It was closer to the Germans. My understanding is that in the Baltics, they had already started trying to adopt German rail standards, or at least Central European standards. So it takes less effort to rebuild north of this Baltic rail zone. So when you're rebuilding railroad up here, it only takes one movement point to rebuild it. Anything south of here, and I mean anything, um, all the way down to your Romanian troops down there, takes 3 points to rebuild. You may be saying, well, I don't really know what that means. I understand that. These railroad units move just like any other unit. Okay, and so we're going to right click and move it up here. Now this is still our territory, right? Now when you click on the railroad unit, it kind of gives you a different display and you see these red hexes. What these red hexes on the railways mean is these are eligible for repair, okay? Quote unquote repair, really you're rebuilding. Let's move this railroad unit into that hex, okay? Now, if we look up to the railroad unit here, you see it's showing that we have RRC1. You're like, what? RRC1, if we click on that, this now turns gold, all right? Now let's go to the next hex, all right? That cost us 2 movement points, and as a matter of fact, let's click off this and get the headquarters out of our way. So now we're on this hex. Let's go back to our unit, and so we can see what I call the railroad view. This hex is still red. If we click on RRC1, it turns gold. Great. Well, first of all, let's go to this unit. Oh, we can't get that out of the way. That's fine. We'll go here. Make sure, now you will be doing this all of the time. Make sure you click off of the actual unit and you're just on the railroad unit. And let's hit RRC1 again. All right. Now we go to this hex, RRC1. And now we're down to just 1 movement point, so we can't go any further. All right. And what we have done, and it shows us we can't go any further, is everywhere here. And if we go to the map information and we click on this out here, as we move around and move off these things and we go to railroad repair, come on, sometimes in the first uh, or in the first turn it won't show it to you. But the basic idea is this, is that um, all of those hexes, oh, here we go. Sorry. You can't be on an individual unit when you hit railroad repair. You have to be on a blank hex. You have to left click on a blank hex so you can see railroad repair. Now what you see here is, orangish, right? So we just turn these gold as we're going. So what's going to happen now is as we hit turn resolve, over this week that the game will resolve for the turn, we are going to repair this railway all the way out to here. And it tells us how many points we're spending, movement points we're spending for each hex that we're repairing. Okay, so we hit next turn, and I'm not going to do that, but well, shoot, let's just hit next turn so I can show you how this works. We're going to see a lot of air war and other things are going to happen here, but I'll continue talking while we're doing it. This is how we build our railway. And to the extent that you've built your railway, in this case, I think we made it to this hex and we'll see it here in a minute. To the extent we've built our railway, now see this is the Soviet turn, so it's showing us what's good railway for the Soviets, right? So we're going to have to exit through some air war here. And when it gets back to our turn, of course, this is all going to be red because this is not good railway for the Axis, all right? Um, and here we go. It's going to go through the rest of it. But the point is, you have to repair this railway as you go along. And now you see as we got to the proper phase here, this turned green. All right. And now we've turned that into German gauge railway. Excellent, excellent. Now, once we've done that, this is called our railhead. This is a railhead. This is a railhead. What it is, and it doesn't have to be the very end one. If a unit is closer to this, so take this unit. This is not the railhead, or I'm sorry, this is not the railhead for this unit. Why? Because the closest green, well, is actually here while we're in our territory. But let's just say that we had moved to here, for instance. This would be its railhead. So when you're talking about supply and I start talking about railhead, what I mean is the furthest extent that you have a green rail hex that is closest to your unit. So as things get behind the front, so let's say we've built rail, you know, all the way out to here, all right? But you have a unit here. Well, if that rail goes through by here and it's green here, this may be its railhead. The railhead is the closest green railroad hex, all right? Why is that important? Because that's where you start counting from when it comes to supply. That is where you start, that is where your supply offloads to go out to the headquarters and to go out to the units. All right? And I am going to stop this episode right here because we have got another, I would say, 45 minutes to go. And I'm going to break this into two because I just think people like that better. I am going to record the second one immediately after this, so I will have it posted up not too long after this one. But I am going to break this into two as opposed to having 1 hour and a half long episode. I would rather have two 45-minute ones. So, as always, thank you very much. We went through production. We're starting in on this railway. Now, remember that word, railhead, because it's going to become the most important thing when it comes to getting supply out to your core headquarters and to ultimately to your divisions. And so when we come back, we will start to delve into that. We're going to talk about how, supply, distance from your railheads. We will also get into, uh, at the end of that episode, I will go into the first Russian or Soviet winter and how that affects all of the Axis troops, how difficult that is for them, how many penalties they get. We'll go into all of that as well and the best way to deal with that because it's really one of the main things you do once the game gets started. So, anyway, for Strategy Gaming Dojo, thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you next time.